Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we continue following the deeply emotional and heart-wrenching journey between CEO Jack and the ill-fated woman he still loves, Tuttienne. Now, many of you who followed this story from the beginning know things have taken a terrifying turn. Although Jack has been chasing down every possible lead, Tuttienne is still missing. And this isn't just any disappearance. This time, she's pregnant, vulnerable, and in danger because of someone who once should have protected her. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next episode. Tuttienne's former mother-in-law, a woman fueled by resentment and spite, had never truly accepted Tuttienne. After her son's death, she blamed Tuttienne for everything. And now, in a cruel twist of fate, she lured Tuttienne into the countryside with the excuse of needing help on the family farm. What Tuttienne didn't know was that it was all a trap. Alone, exhausted, and heavy with a child, Tuttienne was led deep into the rural fields, far from the safety of the city and anyone who could help her. The mother-in-law's intent wasn't clear at first, but when the rain began to fall and the soil turned to slick, dangerous mud, Tuttienne was pushed, literally and figuratively, into danger. Her ankle twisted, she slipped, and before she could call for help, the woman had vanished, leaving her to fend for herself in the middle of nowhere. And that's where her nightmare began. The weather was relentless. Sheets of rain poured down for days, soaking the farmland and nearby woods. Tuttienne, already weak, began to grow ill. She used leaves for shelter, tried to make small fires from damp twigs. But everything was wet, cold, and unforgiving. Each night was a battle to survive. She clutched her stomach, whispered to the life inside her, and hoped Jack would somehow find her. Meanwhile, back in the city, Jack was unraveling. When he found out Tuttienne had gone to her former in-laws' farm and hadn't returned, his gut told him something was wrong. He jumped into action immediately, gathering every detail he could. He didn't trust the police to move fast enough. This was personal. He drove out of the city in the middle of the night, rain hammering the windshield. The car got stuck on muddy rural roads, so he abandoned it and kept moving on foot. He went from village to village, asking if anyone had seen a pregnant woman, alone and limping, looking lost. Most just shook their heads. A few didn't even look up. Life in the countryside was hard. Too many were preoccupied with their own survival to pay attention to a stranger in distress. Still, Jack pressed on. At every roadside stall, every open market, he held out her picture. The same one he kept in his wallet since last fall. It was taken on a crisp morning, golden leaves falling in the background, Tuttienne's soft smile lit by sunlight. In that photo, her eyes were full of life. Now, they were somewhere out there, desperate, terrified, and alone. The flyer he'd printed was soaked through, its corners ripped, the image barely visible anymore. But he kept handing them out, kept asking, "Please," he would say, voice cracking, "have you seen this girl? She's pregnant. She's missing. She's everything to me." His hands were blistered from the cold. His shoes were caked in mud. He hadn't eaten more than a few crackers in days, but nothing could stop him. Because for Jack, this wasn't just a search. It was a rescue mission for the woman who once gave him the strength to believe in love again. Back in the farmland, Tuttienne was barely clinging to consciousness. Fever surged through her body. She'd scraped together a few roots to chew, drank rainwater caught in banana leaves, and huddled in a hollow beneath a thicket of trees, trying to protect herself and the baby. The firewood was always damp. Her scarf, now soaked through, offered little warmth. Her breathing turned shallow. Her lips cracked from dehydration. Her thoughts blurred between dreams and hallucinations. But even in her haze, she kept whispering, "Jack, please find me." And just as her body began to fail her, just as her hope flickered, a call came through. Jack had returned to a small guest house to regroup. He was shivering, burning with fever, but refused to rest. Then, at the edge of sleep, his phone buzzed. "Hello," he rasped, voice barely audible. "Hi," a stranger's voice said. "I saw your flyer in the village market yesterday. I'm not sure, but I think I saw the girl in the photo. She was alone, walking near the edge of the forest by the rice paddies, about 70 kilometers from where you are now." Jack sat up, eyes wide, pulse pounding. "Are you sure?" he asked, struggling to sit upright, still clutching the phone. She was wearing dark clothes, looked sick. "I didn't get to talk to her. I was on a bike, going downhill. By the time I turned around, she was gone." Jack whispered, "Thank you. Thank you. I'm going there right now." The elderly innkeeper rushed in as Jack stumbled to his feet. "You can't go out there now," she pleaded. "You're burning up. It's dangerous." But Jack had already thrown on his wet jacket, strapped his helmet on, and mounted his dirt-covered motorbike. "I can't wait," he said, determination stealing his voice. "If that was really her, I won't lose her again." The rain hadn't let up. The road ahead was barely a road at all, just dirt and water and endless curves through farmland hills and forest edges. Jack's tires slipped in the mud. The cold bit through his jacket. Several times, he had to stop just to catch his breath from coughing fits. But he kept going. Every time he reached a fork in the road, he slowed down, scanning the landscape for movement, for a shadow, for anything. He reposted the flyer. He knocked on doors, showed her photo, repeated again and again. "She's lost. She's sick. She's pregnant. Please. Have you seen her?" Some villagers said no. Others shrugged, never having seen her. But a few gave vague, fragile threads of hope. "I might have seen someone near the edge of the cassava field," one old woman said. "There was a girl walking alone through the bamboo trail," another murmured, "but she looked like a ghost, thin, limping, barely upright." Jack held on to every word. He pushed deeper into the forest edge, where farmland turned wild and trails narrowed into slippery paths, barely wide enough for a single bike tire. His fever raged. Sweat poured down his back, even in the cold. He hadn't slept in over 36 hours, but every inch of his body was screaming the same thing: find her. Meanwhile, Tuttienne, somewhere not far away, was barely clinging to life. She had tried everything the old mountain women had once taught her. After the snake bite near the cassava rose, she used a knife to slice the wound, sucked out what she could, and tied cloth to slow the venom. But days had passed. Her limbs felt numb. Her back ached from sleeping against cold, damp soil, and her stomach, empty. Her body, now paper-thin, trembled with each breath. Her hands were swollen, her lips cracked. She had stopped walking. She couldn't anymore. The rain had soaked through the last dry patch of clothes she had. The baby inside her no longer kicked. Or maybe she couldn't feel it anymore. She crawled under a collapsed banana tree, pulled a torn plastic sack around her shoulders, and lit one final fire with the last dry twigs in her pocket. The flame flickered, then held. Just barely. In that dim orange light, Tuttienne closed her eyes. She dreamed. In her dream, she heard footsteps. Steady. Purposeful. They didn't sound like her ex-mother-in-law's bitter shuffle or some stranger's careless tread. These were the steps of someone who came for her. Then, a hand, warm, brushed her cheek. "Tuttienne," the voice whispered. "I'm here. It's me, Jack." She She cried in her sleep, tears sliding down her cheeks, soaking into the makeshift sack. In the dream, she reached out, pulling Jack into her arms. She clung to him like she would never let go again. His heartbeat in the dream sounded like thunder, steady and alive. "I missed you," she whispered in her sleep. Her voice cracked with emotion. "I didn't think you'd come." "I never stopped looking," he whispered back, his voice trembling. But then, as dreams do, it began to fade. The warmth vanished. The heartbeat slowed, his face blurred, and all that was left was the rustling of banana leaves, the hissing of the wind, and the bitter cold. Tuttienne opened her eyes. The fire was dying. Her limbs wouldn't move. Her breath was shallow. Her chest rattled with every inhale. The sky was dark again. The rain had started to fall once more. She thought, "This is it." Until headlights. Far away. Distant. But real. She blinked. Once. Twice. She wasn't sure if it was real or the fever tricking her again. But then she heard the engine. A sputtering, tired sound. A man's voice, shouting her name. "Tien!" She tried to answer but couldn't. Only a faint whimper escaped. But Jack heard it. He dropped the bike, sprinting across the muddy field, slipping, falling, crawling on all fours until he reached the collapsed banana tree. He pulled aside the wet leaves, searching wildly. And there she was, curled into herself, soaked, shaking, barely conscious. "Oh God," he gasped, dropping to his knees. "Tuttienne, I found you." He pulled her into his arms, wrapping his jacket around her, even though it was already wet. He cradled her head, brushing aside the wet strands of hair from her face. She opened her eyes, barely, and for the first time in days, truly smiled. "You came," she whispered, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. Jack kissed her forehead, holding her close. "I'm here now. I've got you." There was no time to waste. He carried her back to the bike, propped her against him, and started the engine with trembling hands. The storm hadn't stopped, but something inside him had shifted. A fire, a purpose. He would ride through hell to get her to safety. And he did. He drove for over an hour through flooding roads, honking to clear stray dogs and cattle. He barely avoided a landslide on a hillside turn. At one point, the bike stalled in water up to his knees, but he never let go of her. Not once. They arrived at the nearest rural clinic, just as Tuttienne began to lose consciousness again. Nurses rushed out, stretchers rolled, medical staff shouted, and Jack just stood there, mud-covered, drenched, eyes full of fear and hope all at once. "She's pregnant," he told the doctor. "She hasn't eaten. She's sick. Please, save her." They took her in. Jack wasn't allowed to follow. He waited in the hallway, head in his hands, chest rising and falling in broken breaths. Hours passed. Finally, a nurse walked out. "She's stable," she said. "Weak, but she and the baby are both alive." Jack collapsed onto the floor, not from exhaustion, but from relief. He cried, for everything, for what he'd almost lost, for what he still had, for love. And Tuttienne, from her hospital bed, opened her eyes to a sterile ceiling, a warm blanket, and the faint smell of antiseptic. But more than anything, she felt safe. She knew Jack was close. The hospital lights buzzed faintly above, casting a sterile glow over the narrow corridor. Jack paced back and forth outside the emergency room, his soaked jacket clinging to his body, boots leaving muddy prints with every step. He could still feel the weight of Tuttienne in his arms, her body limp, her skin clammy, her breath barely there. Inside, doctors and nurses worked quickly, their movements sharp and purposeful. They cut away the wet, tattered clothes clinging to her frail body, checking her vitals, listening to the baby's heartbeat. One nurse let out a relieved sigh. It was faint, but the baby's pulse was still detectable. That meant there was still time. "BP dropping," one doctor called. "Prep for fluids. Get a line in now." Another nurse turned to the monitor. She's dehydrated, blood pressure's unstable, fever's climbing. At that moment, Tuttienne drifted somewhere between consciousness and sleep. She wasn't aware of the flurry of activity around her. In her mind, she was still lying beneath the banana leaves, shivering, waiting to die. She heard Jack's voice faintly. Was it real or a dream? She couldn't tell. But in the distance, somewhere deep inside her, something told her to hold on just a little longer. She's been exposed for too long, one nurse whispered, but she's fighting. She hasn't given up. They placed an oxygen mask over her mouth, wrapped her in warm blankets, and monitored the baby's condition closely. Hours passed. Every small improvement was a victory. Her temperature began to stabilize. Her pulse grew stronger. The IV fluids worked their way into her bloodstream, bringing life back to her cheeks. Meanwhile, Jack sat slumped in a chair outside, his hands trembling as he held on to the last ounce of hope. He hadn't slept in 2 days, hadn't eaten properly in 3. All he could think about was her. Not just her survival, but the future. A future where she smiled again, where she could walk under the sunlight without fear, where their baby would be born into a world filled with love, not pain. Finally, a nurse stepped out and met his eyes. "She's stable now," she said gently. "And the baby's okay too." Jack's breath caught in his throat. "Can I see her?" The nurse nodded. "She's very weak. But yes, you can go in." He rose slowly, as if afraid it would all vanish if he moved too quickly. He stepped into the dim hospital room and saw her, Tuttienne, pale but breathing, lying still beneath clean sheets. Her face was no longer streaked with dirt and tears. Her hands, now warm, were resting quietly by her sides. A soft beeping filled the room, the rhythm of life continuing. He walked to her bedside and knelt down. "Tuttienne," he whispered, voice cracking. Her eyelids fluttered. She turned her head slightly, and when her eyes met his, a tear rolled down her cheek. "You found me," she rasped. Jack leaned in and pressed her hand to his lips. "I told you I would, no matter what." Tuttienne tried to smile. "The baby? They're okay. You're both going to be okay." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Tuttienne allowed herself to exhale. Not from exhaustion, but from relief. She wasn't alone anymore. She had been saved. Not by luck. Not by miracle.